Alright guys, so we're going to try to shoot this episode one more time. So let's dive into it. Alright guys, welcome back to this episode of Rolling with T-Bone. If you're new here, welcome in. Hope you enjoy our content. My name's T-Bone and I shoot the motorcycle related content and really any kind of content. Just whatever tickles my fancy. If you're old here, welcome back. You know what's going on as we are rolling down the road on Diablo, the V-Rod. Now, the episode I shot before that I lost on the irretrievable SD card, I gave sort of a long-term review on Diablo. Of course, I put out a couple of other videos before this one that y'all seen. Y'all seen me ride the Intruder, and there was a Sportster episode that should have came out before this one. I don't know if the Sportster episode don't come out before this and it'll come out after this one. But anyway, getting off track on that. The V-Rod Nation, guys, is what I belong to on Instagram. If you go to Instagram and you type in hashtag V-Rod Nation in your search bar, you learn that there's a big following for these particular motorcycles. And you'll learn that these motorcycles are more popular overseas than overseas models that are built in their own country. Meaning, this is a motorcycle, you see them in Dubai, Italy, everywhere. They love the Harley-Davidson V-Rod. So, I'm just going to do a few pros and cons on this video as I see it as someone who's riding this bike. Probably one of the greatest pros for me on this bike is just how fun it is to do what we're doing right now. Hit the back roads. I mean, this bike's comfortable cruising at 45, 50. Comfortable to sit on. I'm actually comfortable with these bars being at the height they're at because of the way the seat positioning is. If they were up here, this bike wouldn't look right to me. I've seen them on Instagram with ape hangers on them and they just don't look right to me. I think it kind of defeats the whole purpose of the motorcycle to put a set of ape hangers on this bike. These bikes right here, the pro is the look for me. These bikes just look mean sitting. They got an aggressive stance, great shape, great looking rear end on them. If you're standing at the back looking at this bike forward, you can see what I mean. But another pro is just how smooth these bikes operate. I mean, fuel injected, no choke to mess with, no cold start on a carburetor. You just bust the switch and go, which is very convenient. Another pro is that there is a big aftermarket for these motorcycles, guys. You can change all this out, change your cluster around, you can widen the rear tire. This thing has a lot of chrome accessories on it already, but it has a huge aftermarket. There's been really no gray area with these motorcycles right here. Now, initially when they first came out, I didn't care for them because of the way they rebuilt the frame. The Revolution Max engine, I didn't really understand it. To me, it wasn't a traditional Harley engine. But after riding this one, I realized how wrong I was. It kind of feels similar, and like I've said it before, I've said this plenty of times before, it kind of feels similar to riding a Sportster, like a Nightster or an aggressive stance Sportster with low bars. But that's pretty well much where the similarity ends, because this bike right here has nothing else in common with a Harley-Davidson Sportster. And it don't have anything in common with a Harley-Davidson V-twin. This literally is a bike that's in its own class. You can't classify this in any Harley-Davidson class. It's literally its own bike. Kind of like the Buell was when Buell came out with that 1200 crotch rocket of theirs. Of course, they did a little 500 beginner bike, but the Buell Lightning, the 1200, was basically, it was classified as a crotch rocket, but truthfully it was just in a class all by itself. Kind of like the vrod here. Now, one of the cons, the biggest con for me, is fuel on this bike. The little tank under the seat doesn't hold much fuel, and with the stage 1 Screaming Eagle kit on this thing, if I twist that throttle and hold it there for a little while, you start seeing the fuel gauge run fast, just as fast as the tachometer, speedometer. But just in normal cruising, it gets decent gas mileage. You're going to get about 100 miles to the tank, or you can really play in the throttle and bring it down to 75 or 85 miles to the tank. But that's probably my biggest con with the bike, is just there's not enough fuel capacity. And the location of the fuel tank under the seat, I don't like that at all. And the location of the fuel tank under the seat, I don't know if that's why it doesn't hold more or whatever, but under this right here is the big breather system that sits on top for the fuel injection system, so you couldn't have a traditional gas tank here. Which, could there have been a better design? Probably. But this bike right here doesn't have no excess space. There's no room left on this bike. Everything is tucked in neatly. The battery's up here in front of the breather at the front of the bike. Everything is tucked in, and there's no more room on this bike to do anything else as far as a design for more convenience goes. But that's probably the biggest two cons right there, is fuel capacity and the fuel tank location. You know, it ain't a big bike, so you're not going to get the same kind of comfort as you would on a 200-mile ride if you're riding a big bike, if you're riding, you know, a dresser or something like that. Alright guys, sorry about that. Had to run in and get just a little bit of fuel. But yeah, you know, as far as long-term review, this bike's got its place in our world, the motorcycle world. And like I said, there's a group that dedicate all their time to this bike. It's called the vrod Nation. And man, you'd be surprised just how around the world they customize these bikes and things that they do to them, and how cool they make them look, and you know, some of the stuff that they do with them is just really mind-blowing. But you know, in the long term, you know, unless you've got a good back, and well, I don't want to say if you got a good back, because really it's not that uncomfortable to ride. Could you do 150, 200 miles a day on this bike? Absolutely. I mean, you know, if you're really wanting to do it, you can do anything you want to do on a bike. But, you know, no, it's probably not going to be as comfortable sitting on a Softail or sitting on your Dyna with your, you know, formed seat on it or whatever. But, you know, you can still have a lot of fun with this bike. This is to me, this is a solo bike. This is a, you know, I'm going to get out and hit the back roads and just cruise and enjoy what God's give us to look at. And, you know, but I tell you though, as far as running, that the Revolution engine, I mean, these things, they're a revolution. This bike actually performs very, very well. Engine, plenty of power, plenty of power. But like I said, it's, you know, it's fine running triple digits. It's fine just cruising back 45, 50 mile an hour and enjoying the ride. So if you get a chance to own one, absolutely put one in your stable. Absolutely. I give it a thumbs up because it's a great riding bike. It's fun to ride, great to look at. You know, long-term review is I would definitely, you know, say at least ride one. If you've never ridden one, ride one. Give it a shot. See what you think. You know, like so many others, I stood back and I looked at these bikes from afar, and I just started picking that I didn't like this or I didn't like that. Of course, I come from the 90s era of riding motorcycles. The 90s, we actually, and I've talked about this before in a lot of other videos, in the 90s, in the motorcycling world, we actually saw a change come along in the motorcycles themselves. You know, of course, the Evolution engine took over the Harley-Davidson market. A lot of new models was introduced. But a lot of things stayed the same too with the Sportster. But when you talk about Harley-Davidson, you talk about the Dynas. Everybody was getting a hold of Dynas and Softails and customizing them out. And in the 90s, we had a thing for colors. We loved a lot of colors. You know, wasn't much on primary colors. We liked fluorescent and neon, and we liked for things to be loud. I'll tell you what, I'm gonna stop right here in the shade. I had mentioned this just a minute ago, and the key switch position is kind of weird on this bike too, kind of like it is on the Dynas. But you know, not nothing that you can't get around, basically. But you look at this bike from behind, she's got an aggressive stance. Really a good looking bike all the way around. Alright, too hot to sit still for too long, guys. But, you know, kind of walk around, look at it. You know, on a scale of 1 to 10, I give this bike a solid 8. Just because I knock a point off for the gas capacity and the tank location lost a point. So I give it a solid 8. Engine wise, I give it a 10. That Revolution engine really is something special. But like I was saying about the 90s, guys, you know, we kind of liked color and everything. You look back at some of them old 90s paint jobs that are on cars and trucks and bikes, and there was a lot of symmetrical and a lot of skulls, and a lot of airbrushing was huge in the 90s. God almighty. That everybody was getting everything airbrushed. Tags on their cars were airbrushed, their shirts were airbrushed, motorcycles were airbrushed. Which airbrushing now has evolved and grown so many different leaps and bounds. But you know, in the 90s, and I think back to some of the biker movies from the 90s that I enjoy watching. Of course, Brian Bosworth being number one. I've talked about the movie Stone Cold here on our channel before. The bike that he rode as the character Joe Stone, his custom bike, great looking bike. Of course, Renegade, the TV series. I've spoke a lot about that 89 custom Softail he rides. You know, other movies. Masters of Menace is kind of a comedy biker movie, but it's actually pretty good. I don't know if you've ever seen it, called The Masters of Menace. It has Catherine Bach in it. Of course, Catherine Bach was every red-blooded southern man's and boy's fantasy. Of course, Catherine Bach, none other than Daisy Duke from the original Dukes of Hazzard TV series. She's in the movie Masters of Menace. Good comedy movie. I think it's on Facebook. I think you can actually watch it on Facebook, or YouTube, I'm sorry. And you know, other movies, of course, like now Stone Cold. I did not know till just recently that there was a sequel to the movie Stone Cold made in 1997 that had that starred Brian Bosworth. Stone Cold 2, Coldest Stone or Hardest Stone or something like that. I kind of skimmed over it and watched a little bit of it. Didn't really seem to have anything to do with motorcycles. It was more to do with cars, which was rare for Brian Bosworth. You know, biker movies or cop movies, you know, that seemed to be his forte. But you know, the culture, of course, every decade has grown the culture. But it seems like in the 90s, when my group was coming up, when my generation, you know, adolescent came into adulthood, you know, and I've said it a million times, in the 90s, from 1990 with the introduction of the Fat Boy, all the way to 1999 with the introduction of the Gear 1 Night Train. The 99 Harley Davidson Night Train still had the Evo motor on it. Of course, in 2000 they went to the twin cam engine. But that whole decade just brought some beautiful motorcycles forth. So I always tell people, if you can own a Sportster from the 90s, or a Dyna from the 90s, or a Softail from the 90s, go for it. Harley Davidson in the 90s, I just like the way they looked, the style of them. They had a style to them. Willie G had his input on the company, and Willie G at heart was a biker. He rode, he was a rider. He didn't just work in the corporate part of Harley Davidson. He actually got out there and built. And you know, kind of getting us back to what they did in the early 2000s. I mean, of course, 2003, which is what the Fat Boy is, Big Papa, was the anniversary year for Harley Davidson, the 100-year anniversary. So most every motorcycle that year that Harley Davidson produced had the 100-year tag on it. Of course, at that time, the Fat Boy had turned 12 years old, and 2002 was also the year they introduced the vrod. And at the time when the vrod was I went back and I watched some of the old footage on the vrods from the or from 2002 when they came out. Harley Davidson knew what they had when they built this. Basically, why they called it a vrod, because they knew they had built a two-wheeled hot rod. They knew what they had built. They just didn't know how to package it and sell it. You know, I've read some stuff that basically Harley Davidson just called it the Sportster's souped up cousin, or something like that. And again, what they should have done was just completely focused on the Revolution engine, and this bike standing by itself in its own class, unable to be compared to any traditional Harley Davidson of the time. Because, like I said, other than just being a smaller bike, kind of like the Sportster, and having an aggressive stance, kind of like the 1200 irons and stuff like that, lower slung, lower to the ground, lower bars. Once you get past that right there, that's pretty well much, like I've said, that's pretty well much the end of the comparisons. That's where it ends, because from there forward there's nothing that compares to the vrod. You know, earlier I had spoke about the Buell. In the 90s the Buell came out. It was revolutionary at the time. Yeah, Harley Davidson cross rocket. You know, and I was one of them, because I was in that traditionalist classic Harley frame. I looked at the Harley Davidson crotch rocket and was like, well, that's, you know, Buell, it's the only thing it's got is a 1200 Harley Davidson engine on it. There's, you know, nothing else that says Harley Davidson about it, which was the great thing about it, because as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate the Buells. Never owned one. Now, this is close. This is considered a sport bike type that I'm riding here with the vrod. muscle bike, sport bike, whatever you want to call it. I can't do too good on crotch rockets. I have owned crotch rockets. I got a bad back for one, but for two, I just don't like the stance of them. I don't like the way you got to ride them. I like to be more straight and kick back and enjoy my ride. Again, I say I was going to ride Jay's Boosa Killer, his ZX14 Ninja. I just didn't feel comfortable on the bike. As soon as I sat down on it, I immediately wasn't comfortable. And that plays a lot to me. If I'm not comfortable on something when I sit down on it, I'm not going to ride it. And if I force myself to ride it, I'm probably not going to enjoy the ride. And that's just me being truthful about it. If I have to force myself into riding it, I'm not going to enjoy the fact that I'm riding it, because I'm going to be uncomfortable on it. But I'll tell you what, guys, that kind of replaces the episode. I wanted to just kind of give a long-term review. I give it an 8 out of 10. And I definitely say, if you get a chance to ride one, definitely ride it and make up your own mind about it. If you've already rode it and you decided that you like it, and you get a chance to buy one, if it's feasible for you to buy one, you can buy one. You could do a far worse. I'll just put it that way. But I'll tell you what, guys, we're into this weird pattern with the weather. It seems spring and summer kind of got mixed up. Now we're kind of into summer.